Welcome to Bound by Books. I am one of your hosts, writer Danielle Bannister. I also write under Danny Bannister. I write all the S's from sexy stuff to sweet stuff to suspenseful stuff, and everything in between the sheets.
Ooh.
And I am joined today by Marianne Moramer. Marianne, what are you writing about these days?
I write everything paranormal, all the things that go bump in the night, and my heat levels, depending on which pen name you're looking at, go
Right.
from the fade to black, still
Mhm.
steam, but
Yeah.
fade to black, romance, to romantic suspense to paranormal women's fiction, which is also kind of fade to black-ish.
Mhm.
But my regular paranormal romance and paranormal romantic suspense is ha cha cha. Or as
Nice.
you lick your finger and go tss. Steamy, steamy, steamy. So
Love it. Love it. And there are readers for all types of those. And it all depends on my mood if I'm writing gonna be writing a lot of steam or if I'm gonna keep it sweet. Is this one that mom can read? Or is this one that she shouldn't read? I have readers of all varying types. So, sometimes you need a steamy scene and sometimes you don't.
yeah, I was just talking about that with author Celeste Barkley a
Mm.
couple of days ago because I am entering into the genre of mafia romance. And of course, I got to have my paranormal twists to it.
Yeah.
So they're
Sure.
vampires.
Sure.
So I said to her, "What are the reader expectations for mafia romance?" And she goes, "Well, I can't tell you about paranormal." I was like, "Oh, honey, I've got paranormal covered. Every which way from the smallest little entities straight up to the big
Right.
bad daddies
Uh,
of
uh, uh,
paranormal."
uh, uh.
I said, "It's the reader expectation for mafia." And she said to me, "Spice." I said, "Okay." She goes, "A
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah,
spice."
and I
That's,
and I and
you know,
I'm gonna say probably the more sort of taboo and sort of risque and dangerous,
yeah,
the
yeah.
better is my guess. I mean, I've only read a few mafia books, but those tend to be sort of the tropey things. But we're not talking about sex today. although
No.
although we write romance, so I guess that's always on the agenda for today. But just in case people tuned in, I'm like, what are they talking about sex? Well, this is not what was advertised. But we wanted to talk today about something that you and I have actually talked about a bit before in other podcasts, but we thought maybe we'd go a little bit dive a little bit deeper in here, and just kind of talk about a couple of different ways that authors use different types of structures to write their stories. And so today we're going to sort of be talking about, the five plot point story structure, which Marianne, you tend to focus on that. It's a very basic story structure in the sense that most stories that you read are gonna follow, whether you know it or not, are gonna be following this basic story structure. So
I'm
if you're
glad you
like, I don't use anything, yeah, you probably do. Once we talk about it, you'll be like, oh yeah, I guess I kind of do.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm glad you qualified that because I'm like, wait a minute, I am not a
and
basic bee.
yeah,
That's it.
that's why I wanted to qualify because as soon as I said basic, I'm like, she's gonna think that that's rude, and that's not what I mean by it.
No.
In that it's there in just about every story, and the ones that it isn't, it's there intentionally, sort of breaking the rules of story structure.
Right.
They know the rules and then they break them. And what I use is the sort of the three act structure, which also is the same five plot point story structure, but it's kind of formatted a little bit differently in the way you approach how you go on that story structure. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the 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 basic story structure is, or do you want me to dive into that more, or how would you like to approach this? I leave the ball in your court.
Ooh, you know how much I love balls.
I
Um,
do. I do.
anyway, I'm gonna share a little tidbit here in that I didn't realize for the longest time that it was a 5 point plot system that I was using because I was just writing. I'm a
Right.
pantser.
Right.
I've only gotten into plotting sort of
Right.
recently. And, being a pantser, I was just like, wherever the story is going to lead me is going to be
Right.
fine,
Right.
but
Right.
inherently it just fell into this 5 point plot
Because we
system.
are used to hearing stories in a different way. So what in the same way, whether we know it or not,
Right,
we're used to hearing stories in a certain way, and that's
right,
what this story structure
right.
is. So that's what I was saying is even if you don't think you do, you probably
You're
do.
doing. And I think it has to do with inherent talent too, that, and not that I'm trying to toot my horn or whatever. It's just that
Oh
in
yeah, it
order
comes
to
with
be able
practice.
to,
Yeah.
in order to actually write a story and have the story be done right, correctly, and in the way that the craft should be, a good
Yeah.
writer will automatically do something like this. And if for people who are listening or who are watching, a 5 point plot structure is exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then conclusion. And those five are kind of broken up in the same thing that Danielle was talking about in
Yeah.
the 3 act version of
Right.
this,
Right. Yeah. All
and
those are covered in the
yes.
3 act. But then there's just a little bit more. So I like to think of it as, I mean, I think a lot of people think of it like this is the 5 point story structure. It's like a roller coaster. So you're sort of starting off with your exposition, your normal day to day. This is what's going on in the character's life. And then all of a sudden something happens, and that point is the catalyst when something starts the
Rising
roller
action.
coaster going up.
Yep.
And so then you're in your rising action, and then
Right.
at some point you're going to come to a climax where
Right.
all the shit hits the fan,
Yep.
the stuff, and then the action of course falls because we've hit the climax and now we're falling. And then there's that resolution with the denouement of kind of how the story sort of ends. Like what's that
Right.
final picture? What's that image? Some stories don't have a resolution.
No,
Some
cliffhanger.
exactly. So you don't have, the resolution of that fall. You're left sort of falling with it. So, but that's the basic 5 point story structure. So why don't you break down sort of what it is you do when you're writing and how you sort of take those plot points at 5 point and merge your story through them? Is there like a certain like method that you use within that structure?
Well, now that I've actually started plotting, I mean, I exposition is basically like is explaining where you are in the story, who the characters are,
Right.
what their deal is, and kind of introducing the reader to the main characters and their inner conflict, and the people that the protagonist and then the antagonist meeting and
Right.
having, and and figuring out where their standoff is,
Right. Where are we
and
in this universe?
yes,
Who
where,
are we
right,
dealing with? Right. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then the rising action, like you said, is boom, something happens. Okay,
Right.
whether, and that's where your tropes kind of come into play. Whether you're, forced proximity, or friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, that type of a thing. Um, and then the climax. The climax is usually some kind of an external conflict that
Right.
happens, that either drives a wedge between the characters or just makes them being together just hard, impossible, and they have to get over it, whether
Right.
it's an emotional thing and an external thing as well. It's just like, think of it as like this explosion that kind of blows up their world.
Yeah.
And then the falling action is the beginning of the resolution, how they're working to fix this up. And this is where I always kind of get, we call this the messy middle, at least
Mm,
I do. I call it the messy
yeah.
middle, the mucky middle,
Yeah.
because if you don't keep the pace of the story going, and I think you and I had discussed it, is that when you're doing act one, act two, and act three,
Yeah.
I had it explained to me that the first act and the last act should be a specific amount of word count or chapters, and that the second one should be twice that. Now, I don't always follow that rule.
Yeah,
It could be
depends
even
too
longer,
on genre and trope. I mean, certainly like sweeping fantasies and whatnot, so going to demand much higher word counts just from the nature of they are. But if you're writing a steamy romance, you might be able to get away with a much shorter,
Right,
book. So
right.
it all depends. So I always shy away from things that say it must be X amount of word
Yeah,
counts
no, no,
because,
no,
it's
no.
fine as a guide, as a, like rough idea, but I wouldn't like behold yourself to like, oh, if I go over by 100 words, I'm not meeting the
Yeah.
goal. It's yeah,
No, and you may think that you've hit your climax in the middle, and it's actually when you get to it, when you're especially as stories evolve because they're living, breathing
you're
things
still
that
in
live
the
inside our
rising
head.
action. There's
You
so
could
much
still be,
more.
yeah, you could still
Yeah,
be in the rising action, and they're hitting these tiny little, what do they call them? The when you're having an earthquake, it's the
the tremor.
pre-shocks,
Yeah, yeah,
the
oh yeah,
tremors,
yeah.
before the
It's the
big,
it's the twirl on the roller coaster before you get,
right.
to the end. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
So, but I know that it's the falling action that sometimes, even in my own writing, that it's wrapped up too soon.
Yeah.
That you have to, that you have to,
Well, we're
that,
exhausted from writing all of that,
yeah,
so we're just tired and we're done. But yes, I agree. There's a lot of books that end too quick.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I
I
need
mean,
to finish that.
I've actually had that comment from some readers that it was like too fast. You know what I mean? It was wrapped up too quickly, and I remember sitting there and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense because I was just like, I want this book to be done.
Right?
You
We are
know,
so sick of our books, but the end of them.
I
Trust
just
me, the
want to
fact that
publish
they
it.
ever make it to the publish button is a miracle. But yeah.
So tell me about your own process with the three
Right.
acts.
Right. Well, so this all started when I read this book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. It's a very bizarre name for a book, but it's the only book. I've read a lot of books on outlining, but it's the only book that actually made me go, "Oh, I get it now. I totally understand what I'm doing now." Just the way she broke it down was like, and she gave a lot of examples and like movies and stuff. I'm like, oh, you're right. Movies do this. Oh my God. I see it now. So now I'm watching
Yeah.
movies and I'll be like, I know what you're doing. You're doing, so it's not wrong to use a sort of a structure because this is how we hear stories. This is what we're
Yes.
used to. There's nothing wrong
Yes.
with doing that. So I use her method pretty heavily, and she breaks it down into, the 3 act structure. That's how she likes to do it. This could easily be transferred into a 5 act structure. Same idea, but again, it still follows the story act, but it'll say, these are the things that are happening in act 1. In act 1, you're doing sort of your exposition, you're doing your opening scene, you've got your catalyst, you're going to have your theme stated somewhere in the beginning. What is the thing that you want your hero to be learning by the end of this journey? We find out in the very beginning what we
Yes.
want them to learn in the beginning, but they never
Right.
do because they get in their own way or whatever, right?
Right.
So that's sort of act 1, is sort of, we're still following that structure, we're just going right along with that plot point structure. Act 2 is the largest part of the book, and it's going to contain all of that rising action. But she calls it sort of the fun and games. It's the promise of the premise. So you say, this is what my book is about. My book is about, for like say ABCDs, it's about a woman dating through the alphabet at 50. So at this point in the book, it's going to be the promise of that premise. It's going to be her going on dates. It's going to be her failing or succeeding or whatever it is. It's going to be all of the ruckus of, oh my God, what is she doing? It's going to be the fun. It's going to be what we
Right.
promised the readers, right? So that's
Right.
why it's a big part of the book, because that's what you promised your readers that this was going to be about. And then you're going to get to the midpoint, still in act 2, and that midpoint, you're going to have, your things happen at the midpoint that are going to send your hero on a path that's going to be sort of opposite in the path that they were going in. So if she was having a grand old time on these dates and it was all fun and game, she was laughing and having a great time, after the midpoint she's not going to be having fun anymore. Things are going to be, it's going to start to turn sour on her, or vice versa, depending on whatever you did in the beginning of that.
Right.
It's now going to be the other side of it. And so we're doing all of this sort of in that act 2 moment. So we've got it, up through that midpoint, and which is, the midpoint is sort of that middle of the journey point. And then act 3 is going to be sort of, kind of when the shit hits the fan and what's going on.
Deal with the fallout.
yeah, it's what happens after the climax and the sort of the falling. So
Yeah,
it's the last part, right? So we're dealing with the finale, and we're dealing with that final image. So it's the same thing, but it breaks. And that those are just a few of the beats that are in there. The book goes into a lot more detail about
right, right.
specific little beats that go in there, but this I try to lift up sort of the ones that probably people are familiar with when
Hmm.
they've heard about them. But using that three-act structure really helps me figure out, okay, where do I need to go now? Like, okay, the catalyst just happened. Now what do I do? And
Right.
this sort of instead of going from, well, now it's your rising action. Yeah, but what does that mean? How do I get there? Like what should I be doing next,
It's
right? And
tension.
so
It's tension. You're building tension. You're
right. And
building
so
tension between the protagonist and the antagonist, between the hero and the heroine. They're building tension between whatever external forces are exuding their influence or their, nefarious activities to
right,
kind of get in the way of things. And then the climax is the boom, you
right.
know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that moment where it all goes right
or
or it
it all
all
goes wrong.
goes wrong. And so, and
And if
you're
it all
following
goes
action with
right,
that.
and if it all goes right, your book is over.
Right.
So this is kind of like why you need the boom,
Right.
because for the
It
tension.
can all go right at the resolution.
Yes. Yes.
And it should if you're writing romance. It should be happily ever after or
Or
happy for
happily
now.
for now. Yep.
So if you don't have a happy ending, you're not writing a romance, which is
No.
fine. Not every book is a romance, but just, sort of know that about yourself. If you're setting out to write a romance, the couple, thruple, whatever it is you're writing, must get together at the end and be happy. Or happy for
Yeah.
now. It
Right.
doesn't have to be, if you're writing a series, your couple probably isn't going to be trotting off to their happily ever after, but they'll be happy for that moment.
Right.
Or you do a cliffhanger. So it's that's
Yep. Or
kind of
they're
what
happy for that moment
they're
until
happy for
something
that moment,
happens,
and
and
then
then
something happens, and yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
little
yeah.
boom. But instead of the big boom, it's a boomlet or boomlet.
Right, right.
So
Tiny little step back, one step forward, two step backs. So in terms of using sort of these methods, do you ever find that it's going to feel formulaic? Or are you afraid that, writing this way, if I'm writing to what everybody's writing to, does that make it formulaic? Does that make my work unoriginal?
no, because you could whatever you're writing, whatever your catalyst is, whatever your climax is, it doesn't necessarily have to be what everybody else is, just because you're following this format. The format is just it's the structure of the building. I mean, think
Mhm.
about it. Think about like if you're building a house, you have to frame the friggin' house first before you
Right,
put on the
right,
the accoutrement, the,
right.
the color scheme and
Most
put up the
houses have a
walls and everything.
basic similar structure.
Right. Four rooms on the first floor, four rooms on the second floor, or five rooms on the first floor, and that's it. Three rooms on
A
the
lot of
first floor.
studs.
Yeah. So I mean, it's every genre has its own beats that you follow in whichever structure you choose that works for you, and they have reader expectations. I mean, like you had your book, I have this one. Oop, there it is, Writing the Cozy Mystery,
Ah,
which
there
I
you go.
which I haven't finished yet, but I'm reading that because I didn't, I've been writing romance forever, and
Mhm.
romantic suspense. And
Yeah.
even paranormal women's fiction, even though romance takes a back seat to it, it's still you still have to have splashes of it. You still have to have shades of it in there because otherwise, there's, what's the reader expectation is that it has to be there.
Right.
Not the
Right.
main thrust of it, but it's the yeah, thrust. We're just
Right.
really we're gonna
I'm
start keeping
glad you
score.
said it because I was thinking it.
So anyway, see now you got me all
I'm
discombobulated. So
sorry. I'm
but
sorry. I didn't do that. I have
so
the
you
mind of a 12-year-old boy.
so you have to know where those beats are in your structure because
Yeah.
those are important to hit as well. I mean, if you're writing a romance and your characters don't really get together until 80% into the book, then it's not a romance,
Yeah, you're
you
gonna have
know?
some really angry readers, and they'll probably leave reviews saying as such, and you're gonna be like, but what? Why? Because your couple in a romance needs to get together very soon,
I mean,
like very soon.
I had that comment on this book. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Nope, wrong one. Here it is.
You've got too many books, Marianne. That's the problem. You've got too many books.
The Wolf and the Rose, okay? This is a romance, but I had somebody leave me a comment saying that the first four chapters were really the main character, the female main character and her grandmother, but there
Where's the
were
romance?
because it's a time travel. So she has all these hints of being thrown back in time and all these things that are witchy and supernatural that are kind of happening, but she hasn't met the guy yet. Even though
Right.
she's had a dream about him, it's not the
Oh,
same.
so he's at least mentioned then.
Oh,
Or
yes. I would
all
not.
right,
Yeah,
so you've at least teased. As long as there's a tease that a
right.
romance is coming, I'm happy. But if there's
Yeah.
nothing to indicate that this book is going to lead to a romance, and I picked up a romance book, I'm gonna be cranky.
No,
I
no.
want I want to get there.
She has this dream. He's this, knight on a horse that kind of sweeps her up and everything. So
Right.
she knows that he's there, but she thinks he's a figment of her imagination. And then
Right.
boom, she gets the catalyst in mind is getting thrown back in time and being like, what the hell? So
So
anyway,
you don't find the using the structure then necessarily formulaic to you because it as I said, it's sort of a basic principle of storytelling. So
yeah, yeah.
it's not, I don't think it's cheating. I don't think it's formulaic because
Mm-mm.
like as even as you were alluding to the house reference, you could have 10 houses all built exactly the same, but they're all going to be designed differently. They're all going to be painted differently. They're all going to,
Right,
the crumpets are going to be different. How the person is in that space is going to make each of those houses different. And so
right,
that's sort of what book writing is as well. We've got the structure of the story, but how we choose to decorate it
right. The
is
window dressing's all up to you.
right.
And
Right.
it's and
You can leave the curtains open or closed. I
naughty,
can't stop.
naughty, shape, shape, shape. No. Anyway, and then you have to throw in the other structure that is just coming into play now that most people are starting, well, the younger generations are starting to get, which is serialized fiction, which
Yeah.
is, okay, you've got your 5 points, 5 point plot, or your 3 act structure, which
Right.
are
Right.
intermingled. But what do you do when you're only writing 1 to 3 chapters at a time, and each chapter has to have a little cliffhangery thing to
Yeah.
keep them page
they
turning?
they each
So,
chapter has to sort of have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. So
yep,
you're writing like mini stories that all sort of interconnect, which is
right,
very challenging. You and I are
yes,
doing the same thing writing for Yonder, which we'll probably dive into. That's a good topic for us to dive into another day, is
yes,
writing serialized fiction and
yep.
how is it different than writing another sort of
Writing in
regular
this
story.
full length novel
Right, right.
structure.
Now,
So,
do you ever find, I mean, I guess probably not because you're not much of a outliner. That's the word I want. Um I was just going to ask if you ever found that the story structure is restrictive to you. Like, have you ever wished like, oh, I wish I didn't have to write a climax right now. I wish we could just, get to the climax. Do the
um,
climax now and do the catalyst later, which makes no
I
sense, but
have, but you see, you can get around that by writing a twist. You can put a twist in the story where all your readers are going to be like, "Oh yeah, I know what's happening next. I know what happens next. I can figure this out. This is as plain as
right,
the nose on your face." And then all of a sudden, bam, you throw in
right,
a twist,
right,
and
right,
they're looking at the books or their Kindles, going, "Oh my God, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that
right,
coming." So
right.
you
Well,
set things up for the catalyst to be. That's one catalyst. You could have a
yeah,
second catalyst.
sure,
So
sure. I was just thinking like one way to sort of shake up that story structure is, movies or books that start with how it ends at the beginning. Like,
oh yeah, 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 yeah.
the ending at the very beginning. So they're doing the resolution at the beginning. You know where it's going. You know what's going to happen. And so, you'll get a second resolution at the end, but they're sort of shaking up. They're not starting it necessarily with the exposition. They're starting with that resolution. Here's what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yep.
So you can play with the structure a little bit, but with a 5 point structure, there's not much wiggle room to play because that's kind of how it is. But what I really like about sort of the Save the Cat outline is that it feels like more like guide poles to me. Like I can look at it and go, oh, I need to introduce the B character now. The B character is somebody who hasn't been in the first part of the story yet.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes that's the romance person, somebody who is entering the story because of what happened in the catalyst, somebody who's new to now that we're going up this journey, this B character. Who are you? So that can look at, I can go, oh, okay, I need to think of a B character. Okay, who will that be? Okay, now I know what I'm going to write about. So that's why I like the beats in this, because it sort of helps give me a direction. It doesn't necessarily tell me how to get there, but it says this is the next
Yeah.
stop on the map.
It's a
How,
signpost.
how you get there is up to you in your little
Right.
Ryder car. So, and I don't think of that as cheating, because again, everybody's going to take a different direction
Right.
to get there. And if people like hearing stories in a certain way, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why
Well,
not?
I think from early on, even back in the day when troubadours used to sing their stories during courtly love during the 12th century and so forth,
Oh,
those stories, whether they were sung or they were epic poems that were done back in the day for
right,
entertainment, were had a structure as well,
right,
and
right.
even if they were done in stanzas, those stanzas built one on top of the other
Sure.
in order to still build that tension, that emotion that the people that were listening can then feel. And if it
Right.
was delivered properly, it was theater. It
Yeah.
was absolute theater.
A-
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so
All right. So I guess in terms of our final wrap up sort of question, if you had somebody who is sort of new to writing, what would you suggest to them in terms of looking at structure? Would you tell them to look at structure, or would you just say,
yes,
write your heart out and just do whatever?
no, no, because then you've got to. I actually had a friend of mine. I haven't seen her in years and years, but she had her daughter wrote a story, and because I was just kind of publishing at the time first, uh, excuse me, back in the day, she gave me the story to read, and while the kid's prose was beautiful, it didn't go anywhere. The story didn't go anywhere. I kept waiting for something to happen.
Where's
I
the
kept
action?
waiting.
What's happening? Yeah.
Not even so much the action, but what was the point of it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It didn't have any structure. All it did was just, it was like stream of
There was no
consciousness
rising
flow.
action.
No,
Yeah, yeah,
no rising. I mean,
yeah.
at first I was like, oh, this exposition is beautifully written, but then it was just exposition and then more exposition and then more exposition. It's like, where's the rising action? What is this leading towards? And
Right.
that's what I explained to her mom when she said it. And I had to do it in a very ginger way
Right.
because I
Because you don't
didn't
want to
want to,
dissuade.
mm,
Right. Yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but at the same time, I mean, I guess my advice would be buy the book that Danielle just suggested, buy Save the Cat,
It's funny
writes a
that you
novel.
it's funny that you say that about your the younger writer there, because I actually took the Save the Cat and I made worksheets for it, and I presented it to a middle school talk, and I made them little worksheets. There was like a group of 10 that were like wanting to be writers and they wanted to talk to a writer. And so I printed off basically the worksheets that I made from that book. And it was amazing to just have them sit there with their worksheets and be like, oh, okay, I can, and they just started writing and filling out the worksheets. And it was like they knew what to do and how to, so the ideas that they were generating in just a short amount of time that I had with them was pretty exciting to see. So,
Mm-hmm.
if it's an aid, it's there to help you. It's not
Right.
like cheat codes. It's there to kind of help you figure out how you want to tell the story you want to tell. So
Right.
use
It's
it.
not AI, you know.
Right,
So
right,
this is
right,
coming from you. So you're going to
right.
be putting parts of your, portions of your soul into what you're writing. So
Yeah,
therefore, get the beats right. and you'd be surprised at how cohesive your story will be then.
It'll take some of the stress off writing off because it'll be like, I know what I need to do now. I might not know how to do it, but I know that this is the thing that needs to happen next.
They're prompts. They're
It can get you
prompts.
going forward instead
Right.
of just staring at a blank screen and not knowing what you should write.
And early on in my career, when I didn't realize that I was inherently doing this, there were often times in the mucky middle when I would stare at that blinking prompt going, what the hell? You know, and if you do get stuck, even if you are following the prompts and the guideposts that the structure offers, you know, it talk to other authors, run ideas past them and so forth. You know,
take
don't give
nap.
away.
Sometimes just stepping away from it for a second, or take a walk, to go hop in the shower, do something mindless, and then while your mind is sort of relaxing, the ideas just might flow. Be like, oh, I know how to solve that problem now.
Right. And don't be afraid to read in your genre. Don't be afraid to pick up a book and deconstruct it, because you know somebody who's
right. What are they doing wrong?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I just did that with a mafia. It was a contemporary. It was a dark mafia romance. And I realized something that I don't want to do, because in the mucky middle, the main character became too stupid to live. She went from being this bastion of strength, to being this whiny, little, like, afraid of her own shadow type. And there was so many, I mean, like every like 10 pages was another sex scene. And I was just like, it was just saturated. And I thought to myself, okay, they're not going to get that much from me. If this is but maybe in the paranormal world, that's just not they're not going to want that much.
Right. Well, the sex expectations are different for genres as well. So
contemporary might be.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So
that's why it's important to read a new genre, to know what these expectations are.
So, I mean, I may turn around and say, you know what? I don't know if I want to do that. And it really depends, because if reader expectation is that in that mucky middle, your character has to become kind of like a damsel in distress, that don't do damsel in distress.
Right.
So
and that might have just been that one book. I would read a couple of more.
Yeah, of course.
Before you toss that coin in. But
yeah,
I mean, hopefully that helped kind of take some of the mystery out about story structure. And it's not something scary. It's something there to help you. And there's so much you can Google just on either the 3-act, 5-act structure or the 5 plot point. Google it. You'll get a ton of different worksheets or, diagrams that can help you go. So if you're a visual person, you need to see things, like
make
Google
vision boards.
A lot of,
Make vision boards, put them up around.
Make it work for you. Work smarter, not harder.
Yep, absolutely. Anyway, I think we've covered it for the most part. If you have any questions about where you are and you need a little bit of guidance, or you have any questions about which kind of structure would be good for you, or if you disagree with us that you don't think you need structure, let us know. Put it in the comments. We'll answer.
Don't forget to like, comment,
in the meantime,
and subscribe, and check us
join
out on
us
our
again
website, Bound
for
by
another
Books
episode of Bound by Books. Same bat channel, same bat time. Bye-bye.
Bye.